I want to give you an update on the FireDancey.ca campaign. As you recall, on Monday we launched the campaign when we revealed through our exclusive journalism that Brent Michael Dancey, the new Chief of Staff to Alberta's NDP Minister of the Environment and Status of Women, that Mr. Dancey is in fact a convicted criminal. About 20 years ago in Regina, Mr. Dancey beat to a pulp a victim on the street, actually outside the home of the victim's own mother, just beat him relentlessly, viciously, and part of a mob that did so. Brent Dancey going further than the mob, just pounding the guy, kicking the guy. Obviously, he was sentenced to 9 months in prison and a further 10 years of a prohibition order saying he could not possess firearms or explosives. Just vicious. We revealed this information for a few reasons. First of all, it's obviously in the public interest to know that a convicted criminal is now in high public office. We typically want people who are non-criminals, people with integrity and honesty and clean living, to be the people who make the laws for the rest of us. It's particularly odd given that one of Dancey's jobs is to run the Ministry of the Status of Women, which includes dealing with violence against women. It's a bit much for someone who was so violent himself to now give instruction on how not to be violent. It was also odd because Dancey himself was so manifestly unqualified for his position. As you can see by his official resume, it was paper thin, really knew nothing about Alberta. The man's not even Albertan himself. This goes to the general theme of the Alberta NDP not choosing qualified people. They didn't vet any of their candidates. We can see this by some of the laughable people who were elected. They didn't properly choose their chiefs of staff. 10 out of 12 senior officials in Alberta running our government in Alberta aren't even from Alberta. They're from Toronto or Vancouver. This is just more evidence that no vetting was done. It was hiring friends and paying back NDP favors. Anyways, we broke this story on Monday, but only after I sent several emails and voicemails to Dancey himself and to the Premier's office, asking them for their views on things, their side of the story, anything they had to say. The Alberta NDP government has never responded to my emails or phone calls, so we proceeded with the story nonetheless. And to my delight, the story was picked up, as you can see, by the Edmonton Journal, by Global News, and a few days later by the CBC. Brent Dancey didn't get in touch with us, but he or someone in the NDP got in touch with them and advised that in 2005, Dancey received a pardon for his crime. Now, a pardon means his file is sealed and he doesn't have to answer if he's a convict, but obviously it doesn't change the facts. Brent Dancey viciously beat a man so badly he went to hospital. And I was very glad that I was able to get from the court, even though they weren't supposed to give it to me, the transcript of the preliminary inquiry, which I posted online, showing just how vicious Dancey was. I have no idea if Dancey has reformed himself in the 10 years since the prohibition order was lifted and he was pardoned. I hope he has. I'm sure he deeply regrets what he did. At least I think so. He's never expressed that publicly. He kept it a secret. He tried to keep that part of his life on the down low. I believe in redemption for people, even for criminals, but before you can say, I'm a new man, you have to go through an exercise of contrition and making some sort of amends. As far as I know, Brent Dancey has not done so. He's just tried to keep this quiet, perhaps even from the NDP themselves. That's not redemption. That's not contrition. So what have other journalists said about this scoop? As I mentioned, the Edmonton Journal, the CBC, and Global News all followed our story. It's obviously in the public interest, and they even gave us credit for the investigative journalism. But I want to take just one moment to show you a few journalists who were more outraged by the fact that we dared report this than they were outraged at having a former criminal helping to run the Alberta government. I mean, which is more newsworthy to you? The fact that I asked questions about Brent Dancey, or what Brent Dancey actually did? Well, let's take you to the media party showing their views on this story. Let me start with BuzzFeed. That's a online news service. They specialize in little lists that are fun to read. Well, Paul McLeod is their Ottawa boss, and he weighed in a few times. As you can see here, he says, oh, it was much ado about nothing, just a high school fight that always happens. Well, he was downplaying a vicious beating. Brent Dancey, of course, went on to become a linebacker football. He's a big boy. He beat the victim so badly, he had to go to the hospital. He kept kicking and punching the victim on the ground. But Paul McLeod, an Ottawa-based Liberal editor, was telling Albertans, no, it's no big deal. In fact, he tweeted that there was no story here, but he in Ottawa would tell Albertans when it was a story. Okay, so he doesn't think this is news, although CBC Global and Edmonton Journal clearly do. Here's an interesting tweet by Paula Simons of the Edmonton Journal. I sort of like Paula, but I thought this was just so tone deaf what she said. She said that my scoop, and forget about me and the scoop, that the news itself about Brent Dancey was not newsworthy until and unless the Wild Rose Party put out a press release on it, which they did. Stop and think about that. You have the news that a chief of staff in the government was a violent criminal. Who cares where the news came from? It came from us at The Rebel, but that's not the point. The news was out there, the facts were out there, but according to Paula Simons, that was not newsworthy, that was not reportable. She did not think her readers needed to know about it until the Wild Rose Party put a press release out about it. I like the Wild Rose Party. I'm glad they followed the story too. But do you hear what Paula Simons is saying? She's saying that she is filtering information. What other extremely interesting news in the public interest is she holding back because she's waiting for someone to say, oh yeah, this is really news? Are there other criminals in government that she chooses not to write about because someone didn't put out a formal press release? How bizarre. What's even worse, though, is not just the journalists who said this isn't news. So Paul McLeod of BuzzFeed said, not news. Paula Simons of the Journal says it wasn't news until the Wild Rose Party said it was. But there were a few journalists who actually thought I should not have been able to report this news. Now, in 2005, according to other reports, Brent Dancey was pardoned. He did not return any of our calls, so we did not know this when we published the original information on Monday. But a pardon doesn't change the fact that he committed the crime, was sentenced to jail, had a 10-year prohibition order, and he beat a man bloody. A pardon is a legal technicality that says your file at the court is sealed, and if you're asked at a job interview if you have a conviction, you can say no, because the conviction is sort of mooted. But you were convicted, you were tried, you did do those awful things. It's just a legal trick to help someone get through job interviews in the future. But as an Albertan myself and as someone who cares about public integrity, it doesn't stop me from asking questions about the political ethics of hiring such a man. There's certainly no publication ban over what he did that day in Regina. But listen to what these journalists said about our publication in the news. And here's Taylor Lambert, who says, we've got to do more digging on this. But not more digging on Brent Dancey, more digging on me. How did I get the scoop? Did I steal it from the courthouse or something? Taylor Lambert knows that investigating me for my journalism is more important than investigating a convicted criminal in the NDP government. Here's Duncan Kinney, who says that I questionably obtained this information and the Law Society should be made aware of it. So Duncan Kinney thinks there's more questions out there and we need to alert authorities, not about Brent Dancey, who was sentenced to 9 months in jail, but about a reporter who dared to embarrass the NDP. Isn't that incredible? These are journalists for censorship. And here's Reg Whittaker, who in his conspiracy theory said this was a deliberate leak to Ezra Levant. Look, this story actually is not about me, Ezra Levant. It's actually not about TheRebel.media. I have tremendous pride that we dug up the story, we broke it, and that we have led the media pack. But this story is not about me or The Rebel. The story is about Brent Dancey, someone who was sentenced to 9 months in jail for beating a man so violently. But all these journalists would rather do is say, how did you get the story? And someone's got to ask questions about Levant. And maybe it's questionable how he got it. And the Law Society ought to do something. There's even journalists out there suggesting I should be sued for publishing this story. This is a sickness, not just in the government that obviously has not vetted people, but in our media. If you have journalists like Paula Simons saying there's no story here, Paul McLeod saying no story here, at best, and journalists like Duncan Kinney and Taylor Lambert and Reg Whittaker saying not just there's no story here, but Ezra should be punished for reporting the story, you can see why the NDP can get away with anything, including hiring a man who beat a man bloody. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.